Hello and welcome to this week's Scrum Down NBC Sports Rugby podcast. I am your host with the most, Alex Lowe, and it is great to be back, everyone. Big episode today as we are joined by both of our big star journalists in Alex Lowe from The Times and Chris Jones from the BBC. So I don't want to take too much time on this intro because we do have quite a lengthy interview, but thanks to everyone for coming back in and listening. We just basically go through a lot of the talking points of the week since our last episode. We react to the Jack Nowell verdict and the sentencing of the fine that he got because that hadn't happened by the time Alex and I recorded the pod last week. We then look at the Prem semi picture. We now know our semi-finalists, talk playoffs, where that's going, and then have quite a lengthy talk on the RFU tackle height, clarifications that came last week, the ramifications it has for the game, and just a lot of the big picture stuff around it. Really interesting chat with two of the guys in the know in the rugby world. I voice a lot of my opinions, which are usually a bit outside the box and strong, so take them with a pinch of salt. But I hope you guys and girls enjoy this episode. Let's get into it. And we are joined by the returning. We got 2 for 1 special this week. The Avengers have assembled. Chris Jones from the BBC and returning again after last week, Alex Lowe from The Times. Welcome, fellas. It's good to have you both on and all be united.
How's it going? Good to be back.
Corbs, good to be back. We need lots to pick over after last week, isn't there?
Absolutely. And I think we got a lot to talk about this week. So there's no time like the present to get into it. And for me, Alex, I wanted to start where we left off on the last week pod as we were talking about Jack Nowell. Would there be a suspension? He'd been cited at the time. We both thought it would be silly to ban him from maybe his last game at Sandy Park or potentially a European semi-final. But I don't think any of us were maybe expecting the severity of the fine to be at £10,000. Chris, I'll start with you. What was your reaction to that?
Yeah, it's a funny one, isn't it? Because we don't have too many precedent for this. I know there's been the odd slap on the wrist going round, and Eddie Jones himself was in trouble with the RFU back in 2020, but that was very much a slap on the wrist when he said that England were playing 13 against 16. But I've just sort of been wading through the full judgment, and clearly the panel were umming and ahhing between imposing a suspension, which I think Jack Nowell actually said he'd prefer a suspension to a fine, or whether a fine would be a more commensurate punishment for the perceived misdemeanor. £10,000, I think the panel decided, was kind of in keeping with how much Nowell earned and something that was going to be hit him quite hard without being completely and utterly overly penal. £2,500 of that is suspended till the back end of next season, I think. So for now, it's only £7,500. I say only. It's still quite a big fine, but I suppose that's probably what the panel were going for, a fine that made everyone sit up and take notice a bit.
Well, but between us, we pretty much got it right. We talked about a referee course, didn't we? And talked about a fine. I thought 10,000 was too much. But like Chris, reading through the judgment, it was interesting that Jack Nowell first said that he would rather take the ban, probably because he thought it might get a 1 game, and he was injured for that game anyway. I don't think he'd have wanted the ban if it ruled him out of the European semi-final. And then interestingly, they took note of his financial situation and concluded that he can afford a 10 grand fine. For me, it's over the top. I think it's too strong. I think we know he shouldn't have said it. I think a referee course would have been enough. But they've come in hard. They are, as we said last week, they are trying to protect referees, and they don't want the drip down effect of what Jack Nowell tweets on one Saturday ends up being on the park pitches in the community game the next. So I do understand the need to take some action, but 10 grand seemed quite strong to me.
Listen, I'm going to try and stay calm here because I think 10 grand is ridiculous. Just from the point that, like Chris, I think you referenced a great point that, Eddie, I feel like that Eddie comment is so much worse than what Jack Nowell said. Jack Nowell just criticised one decision, which was a bit of a left field decision. Obviously, by the letter of the law, there's precedent and whatever, but it's not your everyday call. Eddie Jones is actually making accusations that the referee is actually against them on the day and was actually a factor in the game. And to then pull this, where if you look at the position and platform and responsibilities that Eddie Jones has as head coach at England at the time under the RFU guidance, and you get a slap on the wrist, and then you have this player who's not in the same sort of position as Eddie Jones, now they're facing here, and they don't really have any recourse or way to deal with this. And to me, to go to 10,000, like, what about Eddie Jones? How much is Eddie Jones paid, and what is his financial situation, and what sort of fine could he take? But all of a sudden, the panel's taken into account that Jack Nowell is actually reasonably well played because he's fortunate enough to be an England player, still not making a fraction probably of what Eddie Jones made at the RFU. And then all of a sudden, it's okay to fine him 10 grand. Here you go. I just think it's a little bit like ridiculous. I'm sorry. Like I do. And the fact that the comment wasn't good, but it wasn't the worst comment in this sort of genre that we have seen. And the reactions have not been as extreme as this in a lot of the other occurrences. And I think it's obviously a bit of a scare tactic to try and nip it in the bud and get everyone to fall in line and be like, hey, lads, you don't want to, Twitter fingers can be costly these days, sort of thing, which I understand. But I also think when you just remove yourself a little bit from the perspective and look at it compared to the other cases, like it is a joke. It's a joke.
I think we have to remember that Eddie Jones had no time or respect for the RFU's disciplinary process whatsoever. There were times when he sort of almost flatly refused to engage in it. And we all know how powerful he was at Twickenham. So while I totally get the comparison, Eddie Jones had by that point carved out a position for himself at Twickenham where he could do and say whatever he wanted and nobody was in a position to challenge him.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to, I brought up the Eddie Jones thing, so I thought it'd be a hypocrite and I'll say that we shouldn't refer to that because it is relevant precedent. It just is not relevant in the sense that we're obviously in a new kind of environment when it comes to critiquing or criticizing or worse officials. The Rassie Erasmus stuff was probably a bit of a line in the sand for World Rugby and the message that sent out. And interestingly, when you look at the full judgment, guys, they looked at some of the replies to Jack Nowell's tweets and kind of the reaction it was getting from fans. I mean, there is an argument that kind of what goes on Twitter you should kind of ignore as just sort of its own little microclimate of nonsense at times. But the RFU obviously were taking it very seriously, the reaction that Nowell garnered from his tweet. Yeah, and I think that it's harsh, and I don't want players to feel they can't comment, but equally, we do have to remember that Carl Dixon got this decision right. Now, whether you like the law or not, it is in the law. And unfortunately for Carl Dixon, he was stung by that Andre Esterhazen. Do you remember when he was going for the line against Bristol? He stumbled, and the Bristol player came. Yeah, it might have been AJ McLean. I think it was AJ came and clattered him while he was on the ground. That I heard went to a referee meeting, and they said that's a yellow card and penalty try. So I don't even think the referees necessarily agree. They just know that with this up on the big screen, they're under pressure to referee it a certain way. And a point that came to me yesterday was, I think you're seeing some referees who are refereeing with their assessors in mind, and you're seeing some referees that are refereeing just with the flow of the game in mind. And I think you then get a different take on a game depending on what camp that referee is in. And I think that's definitely something to keep an eye on going forward.
That's absolutely right, because we talked last week about the need for empathy, the need for referees to approach games with empathy to help them flow. Otherwise, if they're always refereeing with the assessor's marks in mind and they apply the letter of the law across the field, you don't get a game of rugby. The referee's role on a rugby field is to manage the game according to the laws to ensure you get the right kind of game, you get flow in the game. And the one thing that I would like to come out of this situation is for the authorities, that's the referees, assessors, the executives who sit and try and direct this sport, is to listen to how the players have reacted to this. That none of them could understand why that was a yellow card and a penalty try. I, on Saturday afternoon, watched the Gloucester game. Louis Rees-Zammit was diving for the line. He was airborne when he was tackled into touch. Now, if you do that anywhere else on the field, that's a penalty. You cannot tackle a player in the air. So I asked the question genuinely because I didn't know the answer on Twitter, why that's not a penalty try and a yellow card, because he's been tackled in the air. And the professional referee got back to me later that night to say there was a clarification issued in 2022 which confirmed that a player diving for the line can be tackled. So therefore, in that situation, the law as it applies everywhere else on the field doesn't apply to a player who's diving for the line and is airborne. Now, why is that not wider public? I'd like to think that I've got a pretty decent handle on where the laws are and how the game is played. And I think that similar, it was a different situation, but it applied similarly to the Chris Ashton, Ollie Woodburn case, because although that was on the floor and it was part of a tackle, it was a millisecond between the tackle being completed. I think Woodburn is legitimately committed. He doesn't know he's done anything wrong. And yet, in that situation, the law is being applied in the act of a try being scored exactly the same as it is elsewhere on the field, whereas in the resubmit one, it's not. And that just doesn't help anybody understand how this game is being played. There's no empathy.
But here's just a question for you. Let's go Chris first. Like, if you look at this incident, and, it wasn't an easy one, like from the outside in, without knowing like a bit more detail, exactly what the call was, what was going on. Had the referee's decision been wrong and Jack Nowell's tweet been right, that it was a bad decision, just hypothetically, would that change anything? Because for me, the question is like, are players not allowed to say they disagree with the decision? Like that, I don't feel like that is too far. If you're a professional rugby player and you do this decision made by an official, I don't see it's outrageous that you can have an opinion on whether that decision is correct or not. Where it gets, I think, crossing the line is insinuating that the referee is somewhat doing things deliberately, has an agenda, has a bias, has an unfair influence on the match, or questioning the character of the referee or the utmost morals and respect, which I think is something we don't want to allow in the game. But what I think is a decision. You're not allowed to make your opinion if you think the decision is wrong. That is off the table now for all professional rugby players. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah. No, I hope not. I think this is where it's a little bit grey, and from the judgment, the capitalisation of Knowles ever was sort of them going up, the panel judging that he'd crossed the line a little bit. And obviously the players sign up to a code of conduct when it comes to respecting match officials. But you're completely right, and you're voicing the opinion that I've heard from many a current player, which is, well, why are we constantly being judged? Why are we constantly being critiqued? Why is our performance being hauled over the coals by fans and journalists and pundits and everyone? They're able to say that we had a bad game, or we're unfit, or we're underprepared, or we're tactically naive. But if you say a referee's had a bad game, they're the protected species. So I think I can definitely see where players are coming from. And to be honest, I don't think the referees want to be a protected species. I think they want to be challenged, and they want to be tested, and they are brutally harsh on themselves in their meetings on the Monday, their wrap-ups about what they've done well and what they've done not so well. The big thing about the RFU is what is prejudicing the interest of the game, what is sending a message down to the grassroots to say, if you're a referee, it's fair game for abuse. And they're just trying to get that balance right between having a robust and often quite fun discussion over decisions, and then what actually leaves the referee sort of there to be shot at, which they have judged. That's whether you agree or not. That's what they've judged, that Nowell has kind of instigated a pile on the ref here and gone that little bit too far, and that's why they've come down on him like a ton of bricks.
I think the other element here is, as soon as a decision now goes to the TMO, the referee can only apply the letter of the law, and that means that this what we're talking about here of empathy, of understanding how the players are trying to play the game, of what's good for the flow of a game, gets taken out of it. As soon as you go to frame by frame, as soon as the TMO is involved, the referee can't do anything other than apply the law as it's written. So you do end up getting decisions in some parts of the field which would not be taken in other parts of the field, because on the halfway line, the TMO is not going to get involved. When a try is being scored, the TMO is involved. So you end up with different interpretations, different decisions on different areas of the field.
Fair enough. I think that wraps up Jack Nowell quite well, lads. Well done. Well done. There's some good bits in there. I want to now quickly just react to Premiership Rugby. We now know our semi-final teams. We know the final four. There's obviously one more round to go. But Chris, starting with you, big picture thoughts on the final four and where it may lead to?
Well, I think it's going to lead to a great semi-final lineup and a great final. I'm, from a neutral's point of view, a bit disappointed. We're going to have a very flat final day. I know there's a little bit of scrabbling for top 8, but when you're kind of, the extent of your jeopardy is scrabbling to get the top 8 in an 11-team league, you're slightly scraping the barrel. It promised to be such a great hunt for the top 4 that hasn't quite materialized. And for me, it's slightly in keeping with this surreal Premiership season we've had. When you look back at it, we spent August and September reporting on clubs going bust. We then had an autumn campaign that overshadowed the club game because of what happened to Eddie Jones, Steve Borthwick coming in. No sooner had that happened, the Six Nations rolled around again, and then we're in this funny little period where we flip-flop between Europe and Prem every weekend. So I'm really optimistic about the future of Premiership Rugby. I don't share the same doom and gloom that perhaps is out there from some quarters, but you cannot escape. It has been a strange old season. 2 clubs have gone to the wall. We're going to have a bit of a flat final day. And I think we're going to have Saracens. I think Saracens will take Northampton to the cleaners, unfortunately. Sale Leicester is a tough one to call, and then we'll have a proper showdown at Twickenham, befitting of a great competition. But yeah, just feels a bit of a disappointment that right up to the end we haven't had one of those days. I don't know what Alex Lowe thinks, that where we're kind of wondering who's going into top 4. Obviously, relegation is not a thing anymore, which adds to that kind of lack of jeopardy. So great semi-final lineup. It'll be a great final, but just hasn't quite gone to the wire like we may have hoped.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, it was shaping up to be everything that Chris described as the kind of the ultimate. There were 9 clubs who could have qualified for the top 4, which is the most there's ever been at that stage of the season, coming up to the final few rounds. Unfortunately, most of those who could have pushed on and attempted to qualify fell away really quickly. Exeter suffered a thumping defeat, Harlequins, and then we had, so then this weekend just gone, it really came down to Northampton on Friday night hammering Newcastle, opening up a 7-point lead on London Irish. So the only story in town was, what can London Irish do away at Saracens? And Saracens, having fielded a weakened team at Northampton because they had to rest a lot of their frontline players, they came back full bore, other than Jamie George, because this was their one game that they felt they could play their full strength team to ensure that they can also be full strength for the semi-final. I don't think they want to risk too many players in the last round against Bath. As Mark McCall said afterwards, an HIA, a head injury in that game, will rule a player out of the semi-final. So as it happened, Northampton benefited by beating a weakened Saracens team. London Irish then had to go to Saracens, who were at full strength. And although they had a rusty first 20 minutes, by the end, they looked like Saracens looked. They had Farrell running the show. They had the rolling maul in full power, and you just thought, well, the storylines that we'd all hoped for had all just melted away, unfortunately. But with London Irish, were the last team standing, trying to upset the apple cart, and one drop ball after about 20 minutes turned the momentum, and that was the end of that challenge. So, yeah, unfortunately, we're going to go into the last round of the Prem after what should be a brilliant semi-final weekend in Europe, then a flat weekend in the Prem with nothing riding on it, really to interest any neutrals and really most hard and fast fans. Then we go into the semis, which certainly one of them should be a humdinger. I agree with Jonesy. I think the Saracens will be way too strong for Northampton, and the other one's hard to call. Leicester don't win away that much. It's been a weird season for that. There hasn't been that many big wins on the road. Sale are pretty tough at home, but that'll be a real battle at the AJ Bell, I think.
So I'm hearing Sanderson, McCall head to head in the final. Coming full circle. Sanderson obviously taking on Sarries in a final. Just my thoughts. I gutted for London Irish. I was hoping they would have a way. That first 20 minutes looked promising, but just didn't take enough opportunity and just really get enough reward in there, and then fell to sort of the Saracens sword and machine. The only question marks I have over Sarries is some of their injuries, and mainly in the back row, that I don't feel they have that usual just like physicality that they've had at times, where they just have, you know, two of their three, which are just absolute wrecking balls. And then you have Ben Earl just getting through absolute work and everything, like Jackson Ray at 8 and Ezekwe at 6 isn't quite that same punch. And that's somewhere where Saints are very strong. Saints have gain line winners on both sides of the ball in that pack, quite a few of them. And on a plastic pitch, gain line can be very important. A little bit faster ball, tighter field sometimes. That's my only question mark, is if Saints have a chance or not, is that I don't feel like Sarries are going to bang to the same level that we know they have all season, where they've been untouchable.
For sure. And I think that's kind of what this Saracens 2.0 post-salary cap scandal, what they're having to deal with. They're just a couple more players light, aren't they? If you go back to their pomp, 16-19, where they won Europe 3 times, didn't they? 16-19. And in that time, they were also competing at the latter stage of the Prem. So they'd have a situation where they would be playing Prem last weekend, going into the Euro semi, then Prem, then a Euro final, then Prem again, Prem semis, Prem final. It was just, or Prem semi, Euro final, and they managed to do it. And we know that they were pushing the boundaries, you know, in terms of the rules, but they had those extra 3 or 4 world-class players in their squad, didn't they? Where I think they'll be okay is they don't have that European journey to distract them, or to accompany their Prem push as well this time round. So I think they'll be okay. I think it's a valid point, though. If they had Billy, Theo McFarlane, and then the likes of Jackson Ray off the bench, Ben Earl, you know, is in great form, has been for ages. Yeah, definitely a valid point about their lack of power. But I as much as I like watching Northampton play, I'm just not convinced about Northampton as a power game, or as a sort of a team that is going to be able to squeeze the opposition, take their chances. I just see Northampton as a fourth place side, but I don't have enough faith yet that they're good enough to win on the road in the semi-final, or good enough to string a consistent enough season to get a home semi-final. So I think it's a similar situation to last year with Northampton. They'll give it a thrash, but I'll be very surprised if they're good enough to win at Sarries.
These stats may not be absolutely spot on, but in general terms, Northampton have got the best attack in the league and the worst defence. And I think Saracens will love that, because that first 20 minutes against London Irish, when Irish were on top playing really smart, varied rugby, mixing up the power with some smart kicking, good handling, good angles of running, Saracens just made tackle after tackle after tackle. They made 47 tackles in 20 minutes. London Irish had made 5. I think they'll back themselves to limit what Northampton can do in attack, and then back themselves to take advantage of a Northampton defence that is statistically right down the bottom of the league. You know, Saints are playing some beautiful rugby to watch. Real entertaining, attack-minded style. It's great to watch. But if you're Saracens, who are also spent all season trying to open up their own attack, but their DNA is pragmatism, and even if they don't have the depth of power in the back row, Jackson Ray is taking his chance. He was awesome against Irish. He was very good when he came on against La Rochelle too. They don't have the depth there, and that may be an area that Leicester Tigers or Sale Sharks look to exploit in the final, where they both have enormously powerful packs and back rows. But I just think the way Northampton go about it will probably play more into Saracens' hands.
All valid points, yeah, and I agree with the final. That I think Sale or Leicester, but especially Sale, with some of the physicality they have in their pack, could be, and then with George Ford able to sort of match, you know, Farrell and game control and managing the game. You've got 2 top 10s there. That to me is amazing. And then lastly, I think, you know, how many players George Ford hypothetically gets to a final that could win back-to-back Prems with 2 different teams? There can't be many players that have done that.
Oh, I'm trying to think. Well, I tell you, I mean, it depends if you count Chris Ashton winning the league with Harlequins in 2021. as legit, but I think he was a Harlequins player in 2021 when they won the league, and then he won it in. Then he
asterisk.
Well, I mean, he apparently went down to Quins and got his medal from the team manager. Even though, no, that's he'd left Quins, but he'd been part of the squad. So I think he got a medal. I need to check that with him. But he would have technically been a Prem winner with Quins in 22 and then Leicester in 23. But to play in the, I mean, Ford came off, didn't he? Sadly, after quite early on in that final last year. But if Ford was to do it again, that would be a special achievement. My issue with both Sale and Leicester is how connected they are in attack, and you know, I think Sale have taken some big strides forward in that area in the last 6 months. So you probably got to back him at the AJ Bell, but I think that's a really tough one to call. And there's just some...
Yeah, it's going to be a cracker to watch.
Yeah, the bits between Leicester's teeth, isn't it, at the moment? And they've done so well to sort of style out that period when Borthwick left, Sinfield left. Yeah. Wigglesworth then was announced he was the head coach and then going to England, and they'd lost a few. And I saw some Leicester fans on Twitter were kind of like, get it out, get them all out, start over again. And so that for them to rally like they have is a amazing effort. You know, what you'd expect from Richard Wigglesworth, who's got to go down as one of the all-time great Premiership rugby figures, even though he's barely 40. I don't think he even is 40. He's probably still 39. Yeah, I've got a lot of time for the way both Sale and Leicester have done things this season in a fair bit of adversity.
No, agreed. All right, let's wrap Prem semis playoffs up. Let's move on to the next thing I want to talk about, which happened since our last pod, Alex, was the tackle height announcement and confirmation in the community game starting from next season, and going for sort of the lower sternum as such instead of maybe the waist, which really got a lot of people sort of, you know, fired up at its initial announcement, especially as unexpected. And, you know, we covered, you know, I think both of us might have covered how poorly the RFU handled that initially announcement and getting on the wrong side of public perception. What do you make now that we have a bit more detail and they've had a bit more time to think, vote, and try and actually suss out a plan to explain to everyone of what's to come?
So I'm not always in the habit of giving benefit of the doubt to the RFU, but on this occasion, one of the reasons they went early with this was because they knew that World Rugby were going to do the same thing, and they wanted to try and give as much time to get a lower tackle height in place for the start of next season. Since the furore erupted in England in January, the World Rugby have issued a recommendation for all unions around the world to implement a lower tackle height in the community game at the sternum. However, despite saying that about the RFU, it was a lesson in how not to manage change. It was a disaster because the vote that was taken to lower the tackle height did not include any reference to the waist. So none of those council members who voted for the proposal on the grounds of player safety had any idea until the press release was issued 3 or 4 days later that they'd actually voted for the tackle to come down to the waist. It caused a civil war, frankly, within the grassroots game, a revolt. The 200-odd clubs banded together to call for a vote of no confidence. There was a complete lack of trust between the clubs and the RFU, forced the RFU to rescind what they had announced and go back to the game. The RFU apologised for how badly they'd handled it. They went back to the game with a consultation. However, what wasn't up for debate was the decision to lower the height of the tackle. That was going to come in regardless. What the consultation involved some forums held around the country and a survey which simply asked, and about 8,000 people responded to it. I went through the survey. It asked for how would you define that area of the body, effectively the upper stomach, lower bottom of the chest bone, lower sternum, which is how they've ultimately defined it, and they're going to call it the belly tackle. So ultimately, all that's changed is the definition of where the tackle, what's legal within the tackle. What hasn't changed is that the tackle height is coming down, and there are still people around the community game up in arms about it. There are still grassroots players who have declared intention to not play again. And there's one of the local regions, the Staffordshire Rugby Union, wrote a letter to all its clubs. They don't oppose necessarily any move for player safety, but they're very, very angry that no work was done to ascertain how many players might leave the game because of this. No research, no surveys were done about what the players want. It's a very difficult situation because the RFU and World Rugby will say, well, the evidence and the research points to the fact that this has to happen. So as I go back to my point, it's a classic case of, if you want to manage change, do not do what the RFU have done, because they made it almost impossible in some cases to bring with them people who will question this decision. There are so many better ways of being upfront, being open and engaging and explaining to people why this is important. You've got a better chance of bringing the game with you if you do that.
Yeah, I think the use of the word waste was just, it's unbelievable when you think about it, because whoever has written waste has just failed to comprehend how drastic a change that is from the shoulders down to the waist. It's telling grown adults to suddenly start playing kids rugby, and just the message it's sending was just all wrong. It didn't take the game with people, and it failed to appreciate that the people who play the game at the grassroots and referee and volunteer, they prop it up. They do it for free. They pay to play. And they're also the ones the RFU rely on to consume the game, to sell out Twickenham, to bring in money flooding into the coffers, and to get the players their 25k and get the Twickenham suits their big bonuses. So it was all just terribly handled at the time. I'm glad there was since a consultation. I'm not overly comfortable that consultation seemed to be, well, we're definitely changing it. Let's talk about the wording. But I also sympathise with those people in power, because, I heard from an executive the other day who said, for 6 months, all I got was emails from concerned people about the lawsuit, about concussion, about brain health in the game. And now all I'm getting is people saying, don't take our game away from us, don't change it. So you are kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't. I just would send one plea to Twickenham and other unions. Don't ostracize and isolate and force away the people who have given this game so much over so many decades. And those are the people who play at their local club and then trek down to Twickenham, and who go into their ballot at their clubs to pay the extortionate cost to watch the England team play. Don't say to them, okay, we're happy to lose you from the game as a participant. We'll just have you as a consumer, because that's not what the game's about. The game is a pyramid. And I don't see how this works going forward unless the pro game also adopts it. Not just because I think it sends a bad message to say, we won't touch the pro game, where actually concussion is far more of a dangerous issue. The players are bigger, the training is more regular, the collisions are fiercer. We won't change that bit, but we'll change it for you guys because we know what's right for you. It not only sends that message, but it also means the pyramid is over. Because if you're in the Championship, you're relegated to Nat 1, you're playing different rules and different laws. So on those two counts, I feel that the pro game will have to do this as well. And I think the base of the sternum will now depend a lot on interpretation, a lot on referees. The waist would have been completely unworkable. And hopefully the base of the sternum is that compromise between bringing the tackle a little bit lower. I don't know what huge difference it will make, but even if it's a couple of concussions a season per club, people say that's worthwhile. But there has to be a middle ground where the game retains what it is all about, while also trying to make a few changes for player safety. And I think we're going to have to wait and see. The RFU are not for turning, World Rugby are not for turning. So it is a kind of suck it and see job. And let's hope in the short term this doesn't drive away those people from the game that have given it so much over so many years.
I think your point about the pyramid, Jonesy, I was going to make exactly that. Last week, Alex and I were talking about the structure of English rugby and how it needs to evolve. And there's a lot of conversation going on about the need to separate out the running of the elite professional game in England from the community game in England. That the RFU's brief is too wide, and it's led to these tensions between the clubs and the RFU. What this is actually doing is it's separating out the elite game from the community game. As you say, there are different laws being applied now from next season all the way up to the third tier of English rugby, and then the top two tiers can go and play in their own competitions with the traditional laws. if you like, and that's already creating a separation between the two. It's like it's one game for the amateurs and a different game for the pros. Now, there is an argument that the at executive level that separation needs to occur, but I do think that the people involved in the game, as you say, the consumers of it, those who pay TV subscriptions and buy tickets and play and pay to play, they don't want to feel like they're not as good, or that they need to be looked after by someone at Twickenham, whereas the pros don't. It needs to retain that connection for sure. And how this works next season, I mean, it's Richmond at the moment at the bottom of the Championship. If they go down, they're going down into community rugby. That's massive for them. All their players who've spent all that time training as semi-pro, maybe even former pro, all that muscle memory of how to tackle. They've got one summer in which to change everything they do. And then separately, I'll just throw in, at Saracens, you saw one of the tackles of the season on Sunday from Fata Savalo. Forgive me if that's not how you pronounce his name. Fata Savalo, the London Irish number 8, who absolutely levelled Hugh Tizard. And already there's a debate about whether that would be legal or not in the community game next season, because the sternum is quite a hard thing to define. I know Major League Rugby, when it started, actually, it had a line on the jersey to help differentiate between a high tackle and not. But the sternum is not that easy an area to define. You may just be opening a whole nother can of worms.
Yeah, I got a lot of thoughts on this. Number of ones, I think it's, well, there's a load of things. So I think like the sternum is still quite a drastic drop. I don't see what's wrong with the nipple height. You're far enough away from the head. It's not as dramatic. I've always wondered why it has to go from here all the way to here and you couldn't kind of go there. Seems a little bit less dramatic, easier to work into the community game underneath. The next question, and I hate to be the cynical one, is like the RFU like to act like they're doing this for the good of, you know, the game, the welfare. But why are they the only one doing it before World Rugby or before everyone? And for me, it's a response to the legal pressures and the lawsuits they're on. And then it follows into my next question, where these trials of studies, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be wrong, but my understanding from when I read this at the time was a lot of the data or what was presented to get this convinced to the clubs came from trials in France. And my understanding of the trials in France is that they weren't the exact same interpretation of what the game is going on about. There was, from a lot of the trials that had the positive data, that they had it to the sternum or whatever, but I believe they banned two-man tackles, and I believe they also banned the carrier dipping into the contact. And I would argue that two-man tackles and carrier dipping would have in my opinion, I think would bring the concussions down more than just dropping the height from here to here, because a lot of the concussions are bump, elbow, hip, something there, or two people banging each other and actually causing a collision by almost having these two-man hits coming round on yourselves. And that's my question is this actually the right thing for the game, or is this more PR and a reaction to the pressures the game under? Because the data and the trials that use, they only cherry picked the bit they wanted that they think they could implicate that wouldn't ruin the game to a point that maybe makes it much more unrecognizable. Not calling them out cynically, but just saying devil's advocate, like I do have question marks over that aspect. Yeah. And then another aspect I'll follow on is, what about, it's going to have to come into professional game. Like when? What's the plan? When? What's going to go on with 18s and 20s? When are they going to start playing by these rules and not the men's rules? Will they play 18s and 20s with the old rules, but then if they get called into the Prem or the senior teams, they go back to the old rule? It's going to be an absolute mess. So like some sort of understanding of how the community game, which feeds the professional game through the talent pool that it produces from youth through, like where are you actually going to implement this change from them to the professional game, and how does that all align? Like it just doesn't seem dramatically well thought out to me, and gives me a lot of questions.
When do you suddenly decide you're now a pro player playing pro rules, or pro laws? At what point? You know, when you go into an academy, and then do you not have any dual registered players playing down at Nat 1 or whatever? Are so many questions. that still, whether we were asking in January, still aren't answered. Yes, there's a little bit of clarity over waist sternum. Again, that's grey. And I think the real big thing for me is telling referees out there, look, please don't just feel you've got to be absolutely on it. Every tackle that you think is just around the above upper belly penalty. Come on, let's look at it. Talking that point about feel for the game. If someone's made a tackle that looks legal, but this is the thing. I mean, I you get players. Oh, I don't know. It's something we could discuss genuinely for hours. I share your cynicism a bit about the French trial. As much as they talk about the science, they also say something quite wishy-washy and anecdotal, like, and reports say it's led to a better game, a more free-flowing, higher offloading game. That's not the job of the community game. I'm sorry, but the community game can play the game however they want to play it. They've got absolutely no responsibility to play a fast, loose, offloading aerobic game if they don't want to. They're paying to play. It's their choice. Different with the pros, because they need to have a product that is appealing for people to pay to watch it. But if the community game want to do things a certain way and stick it up the jumper and roll mauls for 80 minutes, that's completely their prerogative. It's the prerogative of the pros, but people may leave the grounds. So that kind of bit slightly irks me that, oh, this is what's good for you. But just to see it through the eyes of the lawmakers, they are worried about an existential crisis over participation. Now, that leads us on to a more holistic conversation about what will increase participation. Is it making a different type of game, one that is more about evasion and less about collision? Maybe. Or will participation is the key to engage people who are already in the game to then bring their kids along? Or do we want people who aren't involved in the game to come along, but in that process maybe lose all the interest of the people who have already been part of it? So I don't know. I feel like it's a conversation where we've got so many different strands of it. I'm not massively comfortable with the process. I understand where they're coming from. Like you, Corbs, I think a lot of it is about optics, but optics are important because it's a game that is struggling for its very existence and grappling with its very essence when it comes to safety and parents and the future of it. So there's just so much that comes into this.
The legal issue was front and centre of the conversation that the RFU Council had before voting this through. Someone said to me that they were basically told, or if it wasn't told explicitly, very strongly implied they would leave the RFU legally vulnerable if they didn't vote this through. So the legal side of it is massive. In France, the trial was at the waist, but it was allied with no two-man tackles and no dipping. And by the end of the trial, my understanding, anecdotally, is that referees loosened up on it, and providing the tackle was below the ball, they were happy. Now, that plays into exactly what Chris is just talking about there. They want the tackle to be low enough so that the offloads can happen. Inevitably, you got grassroots coaches already looking at this going, they're talking about us playing this high energy, high speed aerobic offloading game. Have they not watched level 10 rugby? These lads have like one training session a week, and they might spend a couple of nights down the gym, but they're not elite athletes. It's really hard for them. You're not going to get that type of game. Plus, the more offloading you have, the more drop balls you have, the more scrums you have. So they've got to be careful what they wish for here. And I'm cynical about trying to sell it on this new vision of wonderful attacking rugby, because that isn't why lots of people play the game. Lots of people play the game because they love it for the physicality of it, not for the offloading. I'm not cynical about why they brought it in. I know why they brought it in. It's because they've been told by the lawyers that they have to.
I just, hearing you speak, and thanks for the clarity on the French trial. So basically I did know that they allowed it to under the ball. So that's kind of why I went with sternum. That makes sense. But the question for me is, it's like, how do you take those rules and not implicate no two-man hits or no dipping? Like, just look at this from the outside in. Like, on a pick and go, where are you supposed to tackle? Like, near the goal line, I pick and go. I'm allowed a latcher still. Two defenders on the line.
Pick and goes, though. That's what they're saying. They're still allowing.
Yeah. So you can make shoulder-to-shoulder contact on a pick and go.
Yeah. But again, is that only close to the line, or is that when your dog and duck third 15 prop just wants to trundle around the corner? Like, I don't know. This is the thing.
It just leaves so many doors open to me, and that's why I just don't think it was well thought through.
Yeah, I just pray it doesn't lead to people just flooding away from the game.
Agreed. And I think, I understand that dropping the height does make sense. I just think it was like, man, you had one trial that had all these extra rules, and you just picked one rule out and then think you've got the magic silver bullet to fix it all. And, the community game's up in arms going, how do we actually do any of this to get it right? But anyway, I think that's a great place to wrap up this pod. We've gone, our usual 45 minutes. Guys, thank you so much for coming on. It's always great to have your insight and great to sort of go full circle on a lot of these sort of current topics with, guys as prestigious journalists in the game of rugby as you and my friends as well. So I appreciate you coming on the pod. Thank you so much.
Oh, anytime, Corbs. It's been good fun.
Anytime. Good to chat, guys.
No, it's been a good one, guys, and I'm sure we'll get more in soon, as it doesn't seem to ever be a dull week in rugby at the moment, and we got a decent run in. But cheers for everything, guys, and we'll speak soon. And that is a wrap on this week's Scrum Down. Lots of good insight in chat there. Very diverse, effective opinions and perspectives on things, which is what I quite like, bouncing off those guys. We obviously don't always agree, which I think is good to get some of that out there. Thanks again for Chris and Alex coming on. They just add so much value to the pod, and I'm really grateful for them. Thanks to everyone for listening, supporting. Keep checking us out on social media, on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We appreciate the love, appreciate the support. Keep subscribing, liking, favoriting, retweeting, commenting, sharing. Tell your friends, all the good stuff. We really appreciate it here from myself and all of us at NBC Sports.